Okay, recording started. Get that position right. Okay. Philippa! Mwah, mwah, mwah. How you doing, my darling?
Hello, I'm all right. I'm
Um,
good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm just turning my phone off. Typical of me to forget, just in case it interrupts us, and I don't want it to interrupt us. So, um, wow, I keep mentioning that, or I mentioned in the last video when I was talking about doing some interviews that we tried this, I think a couple of years ago. I don't, it could be longer. Don't correct me if it's longer.
It's probably about
Um,
3 years ago, I think.
about okay. Um, yeah, and it was great, wasn't it? And we had really excited. I was really excited about it. And then it was on a work laptop, and so I couldn't download it. Right, so I was really like gutted. And it's taken us this long to get back into a place where we can do it again. So that's good anyway. And this time it's all on my computer and my laptop, so we're all safe.
Good.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this, Phil. I just want to say that, first of all, I suppose, how we met, because I feel really lucky to have met you. We met, and it's about 10 years ago now, I think. And we met through a mutual friend who sadly we lost. And I did talk about him in one of my previous videos. Loved him dearly. I'd just come back from South Africa, and I was kind of starting my life again. I'd kind of had a bit of a heartbreak and trauma, and I was kind of trying to find my way again. And you'd made a transition, which you're going to talk about hopefully. And I feel really lucky to have met you, because at that time I was able to work with you. Well, you worked on me, and it really helped me, because I remember how what I was talking about. I remember how it's like I needed it at the time. It was just like the timing was perfect for me. Um, and so I just want to say thank you for that. If I haven't done before, I'm sure I have, but thank you for that. Thank you for being in my life, and thank you for being a wonderful friend. And I said to you, I saw you not so long ago at one of your sessions, Soul Sanctuary sessions in Malden. And it makes me laugh because I was really excited about this. It's a combination of your breathworks and sound healing, sound bath, and with a friend of yours. And it was just absolutely amazing. I loved how I rocked up, typical Martine style, with no prep, nothing with me. And you just looked at me. Have you not got anything? No. Okay, here's my keys to the car. Go and get yourself a futon. You just fake it in your stride. You've got me, right? You've got my back, and I bloody love it. And you're just so, and I said to you that night, you're just such a beautiful, loving human. And you're so gentle, and I love it. So anyway, I just want to keep gushing and say thank you. I want you to now just, because I wanted to share about your stuff and your journey. So Phil, can you tell us about your journey and about what you do?
Yeah. So, well, firstly, you're going to make me cry. So, thank you for that. Yeah, it's definitely a two-way street, and it's so lovely to connect with you again after all this time, because it has been a wild and wonderful roller coaster of a life in those 10 intervening years, right? I
Yeah.
think for both of us, it's fair to say. So, yeah, glad to be back here recording this again. So we're in a different place
Yeah.
again. Let's see what
Yeah.
comes through this time. Um, but yeah, I feel blessed to have you kind of re-entered my life recently. So thank you for that. And the same, just a very kind and loving human that you are. So yeah, a
Mm.
bit about me. Well, yeah, when I met you, I was working in the big smoke. I was working in London, and a very, very different life to what I have now. So I just, I guess, precursor with what I do now is I'm a breathwork facilitator. I have been for the last getting on for 9, 10 years since I found this work. Before that, I had a very, very different life in the corporate world. And these days, I'm more focused on helping people release their emotional baggage, learn how to use breathwork to do that, um, and some other things which are really about our mindset, our limiting beliefs, what we believe about ourselves and about the world, and actually removing things like fear, removing our limitations so that we can actually go out and create the things that are really on our heart, right? There's only one of us, and we're here to bring a unique set of gifts and talents and experiences, and footprint to the world and the universe. So most of us are so bound up by our past that we don't have the capacity to do that. And so really that's the focus of my work now. And also I'm kind of branching out, going more into the corporate space, and bringing breathwork into business, because it's such a practical and powerful tool that everybody can use, right? As you know.
Mm.
So that's where I'm at now, is breathwork, leadership development, you know, a bit of everything in addition to outdoor instructing, in addition to whatever else that I feel like doing. Yeah, but before that, as you know, yeah, I lived and worked in London, lived in London for about 15 years. I worked in the insurance sector for 12 years of that. And before that was at uni. And I got to the point where I just had what I would best describe as a quarter life crisis, in my late 20s, end of a relationship. And that was the catalyst really for me starting to look at, who am I? What am I doing? Is this what I want? How did I get here? What is this job? Is it me? Is it the job? Um, that all the questions and very few answers, and more questions. So that was the trigger really. And then a few years later, I ended up, as you know, leaving that profession and traveling the world, training in breathwork. I lived abroad out of a suitcase pretty much for about 4.5 years on and off, and got to see a lot of things and places, and uh, practice my craft of breathwork, of teaching and sharing the power of breath in different places that I went to. And then I came back to the UK in 2019, having also worked briefly in the field of psychedelics and sharing breathwork in that space, and all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff. And now back at the moment in Essex, um, doing a few bits and pieces, and including, as you said, the session that you came to. So every
Yeah.
few weeks or so, we offer a breathwork and sound healing session, which is in person, a group evening, Friday night with a difference. So that's a bit of the run through of my weird and wonderful background.
You know, you brought it back around to the soul sanctuary, and just kind of to say it was absolutely amazing, first of all, but how interesting, and in you saying about, you know, sort of releasing emotions and stuff. And as far as I know, it kind of, I understand now that trauma and trapped emotions, you know, can't be released necessarily through talking therapies. And talking therapies has been a big part of my journey, but it has its limitations, right? And coming to your session now, when you was working on me all those years ago, I remember the release of the motion was me just sobbing, and you held me, you know. So that was absolutely awesome, and it was exhausting as well, because it feels like, if you think that breathing is easy, oh my word, it's like a workout, isn't it? And
It
so,
can
and
be,
that's the
yeah.
good, yeah. And the exhaustion of it and releasing of emotion was absolutely phenomenal for me. It's so multifaceted, isn't it? It's just kind of blown my mind again. Um, and
It
I
always
think you,
does. It always blows your mind because it catches you off
yeah,
guard when we get all kind of bunged up and disconnected and discombobulated, and then we come back to a
yeah,
practice that's like, oh yeah, of
yeah.
course.
You get the insight, yeah, and it comes from a different place, right? Because we can't always think our way well, can we? You know, it's kind of, there's a huge thing about perspective, and I love CBT, I love all that, and the talking therapies, and you know, I really do, but I do think it's limited. And I do think, just like we've got muscle memory and things, we've got memory in our bodies of trauma, and I think that needs releasing. So, you know, it is amazing stuff. You talked about your journeys, and that you come back to Essex, and it was about 4.5 years you was jetting off. I couldn't keep up with where you was. I didn't know where you was from one minute to the next. Where are those places, Philippa? And talk a bit about, if you don't mind, the psychedelics, because that fascinated me, because I'd heard about that many, many moons ago. Another way of kind of getting out of our own heads and going into a different space. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so I'll tell you where I went first of all, I guess. So
Yeah,
the majority, I spent a big chunk of time in Brazil because I kind of fell in love with Brazil when I was having my kind of opening up and seeing what's more for me in the world. And I went to Brazil on a trip and just loved it. And I knew I needed to go and stay there for a while. So I spent probably 18 months, 2 years there on and off. I was in Australia for a while. I was in places like Bali and Thailand, a little bit in Mexico, some of a few trips to Europe, but yeah, predominantly Brazil. And then, there were big chunks of time in places like Australia and Bali, interspersed with time in the UK. So I didn't really, it's a funny thing, I didn't really travel like a tourist. I just traveled more like I was living and staying in one place, and particularly in Brazil, I lived in Rio. And there were a number of expats there at the time, kind of going through a similar thing, to be honest. So I had quite a nice community of people. I actually taught breathwork for a while in a little venue in Rio as well. That was really funky because they practice a particular martial art that uses a padded floor, and they had this whole studio that the entire floor was padded, and it was really high ceiling. So it was amazing. We could do breath work directly on the floor. We didn't need to bring mats or anything special to lie down on. We just lay on the floor and, do our breath work and our sound and our movement, having our tantrums and stuff. And it was absolutely phenomenal. So yeah, quite a few places on the list. I was in the US for a bit as well, because that was where I did some of my training as well, way back when, in 2014 and 2015, in fact. You want me to talk about the psychedelic piece as well?
Before you do, yeah, before you do, how was those cultures that you kind of immersed yourself in? Because, like you say, you wasn't really a tourist. You did actually stay and live there and work there. How have them cultures sort of impacted your work or your perspective on your work?
So, Brazil, spending time in Brazil was a real eye opener for me, just to see how different culturally that country is, and South
Yeah,
America, and not the whole of South America, but there is a flavor to Latin America that has much more freedom emotionally and
yeah,
expressively, and
yeah,
to enjoy life. So if you think of
right,
Brazil, for example, you've got samba, the music, you've got dancing,
yeah,
you've got
yeah,
carnaval, you've got the beach, the weather, the jungle, the caipirinhas, the volleyball on the beach, all of the surfing. And yes, there is work. Everybody works
yeah,
and does their thing, but there's a flavor to life that is quite much more raw and wild than than kind of domesticated UK. It's almost the antithesis of the UK, which seems to be very uh, emotionally um, disconnected. The stiff upper lip. The
yeah,
as a friend of mine put it, I said, "How do you feel coming back to the UK?" And he said, "Happily depressed." That's what the people give the vibe. People being happily depressed. And so you go to Brazil and there's nothing like that. There's nothing like
right,
that. It's very, very different culturally. And then, so that for me was really a taste and sense of that kind of freedom, of
yeah,
being much more in touch with our feelings and more heart-centered, more open-hearted. And then places like Bali, I guess there's quite a lot of Western spirituality now, but there are also deep spiritual practices in those
yeah,
cultures, very much tropical, wild, natural places. And then Australia again, very much an outdoorsy culture. Um, Again, slightly different culture. I feel quite open, actually. I know some people say that Australians can be relatively closed as culture, but I think that's maybe in the bigger cities and the older generations, but certainly the younger
yeah,
generations, there is this kind of quite significant shift of consciousness. So all of the things that I was doing at the time, which were things like the breath work, seemed to be much more engaged in those places than perhaps they have been in the UK, if I reflect on it now. Yeah.
yeah,
So definitely a big impact on me just in terms of seeing and experiencing different cultures. And also when I lived in Brazil, I had to learn Portuguese. So
Wow.
I speak
Okay.
enough Portuguese, right? But I had to learn Portuguese because not many people speak English in Brazil. And you'll find typically the people that do are those that are wealthier. They've often had private schooling, or
Okay.
they're self-taught. So the majority of people, even though a lot of people consider that somewhere like Rio is a quite a touristy place, and yes, it is, but surprisingly, not that many people speak English. So I had to learn
Right.
Portuguese, and then learning another language as well is a whole 'nother dimension to the culture.
Yeah, of course. So you
Yeah.
knowing a bit of what you can then immerse yourself a bit more into the culture, can't you? And build sort of relationships, deeper relationships, I guess, because you're kind of using their native tongue, I get. I don't know. Is that the case?
Yeah, and there's also, I think it's Jason Silver talks about that there's a whole 'nother personality, a whole 'nother layer of something when you are connected to that language that
Yes.
for example, if English is your first language, there are certain things you take for granted in knowing that language and expressing yourself in that language, and certain nuance. There's even
Yeah.
almost a way of thinking that goes with that language, and the same goes with learning another language as
Yeah.
a second language.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if I speak in Portuguese, se eu falo em português, yeah,
Wow.
there's a different intonation to my voice. Probably my body language is a little bit different. My energy is a little bit different because that is partly the energy of that
Yes.
a língua portuguesa, the Brazilian language or the Portuguese language as it initially is, gives you. It's just different.
And you can't always translate because some words in another language can't be translated into, and that's just kind of confirmed what you're saying, really.
Yeah.
So, and that's what I love about your story is that you immerse yourself in it, that you're authentic, and that's how you didn't just go touristy. You went to live there and met different people and kind of did your work there. And I think that gives that another level of authenticity onto your work as well. And I think you've probably fit into that culture because you're very open, right? You when I hug you, for instance, you hold and hug. You properly hug. It's just kind of a gesture, but with you. So I know that I understand now a bit more about why you stayed there. But so thanks for that, Philippa. Yes, so the psychedelics. Tell 'cause that always fascinated me. Tell me a bit about that. What you learned about that.
Yeah, well, it never fascinated me, ironically. I was always terrified of, I guess growing up, I was always the good girl and, that didn't break the rules and the goody two shoes
Yeah,
and had always been quite afraid of any sort of substances that were other than alcohol, which was part of my kind of culture, I guess, growing up. But drugs were
yeah,
always,
yeah,
or any form of drugs was always banded in the same bracket, and I was quite afraid of. And so when I was living in Brazil, I had some exposure to some of my friends that were working in different fields, such as psychedelics, um, with a view to using them in a medicinal capacity. Now, I then had an experience which was something called Cambo, um, which is actually an excretion of a frog, and it creates a reaction. So it's placed on the skin and it creates a reaction, which is not psychedelic in nature. But this is how I came to working in this field for a brief period of time. This was very much a purging experience, and it's
right. Yeah,
very much a detoxification process, and it did have that effect, albeit this is the equivalent of feeling like you're poisoning yourself, right? Your body does go into quite an intense reaction. So as somebody that at the time was relatively a control freak, it
cool.
was yeah, it was quite an intense thing to do. Yeah, and that led me on to probably 6 months or so later being invited by a friend of mine who was being involved in setting up a retreat center at the time to go and facilitate breathwork. And so that ended up happening. I ended up going on that journey for a period of time. And what I learned from that, and this isn't something really, I guess the learning that I had from it is it's not something that I personally advocate these days for. Obviously, people have free will to go and choose to do whatever they want to do.
Absolutely. Yep.
But what I found through those experiences and the people that uh, I worked with or subsequently came to me with issues in that area were that there can be more um, challenges created than resolved. It
Ah,
can
interesting.
open people up a lot. And if you're not
Yeah.
prepared for the fallout of that and how to deal with that sensitivity, you go away and
Gotcha.
have quite an intense experience and come back into your old life and nobody else has changed and you have.
Yeah.
It's quite a tough one to integrate that experience. And I
Right.
think the long story short of what I learned through my time there, it was very, very intense period of my life. And what I learned from the breath was that the breath really does the same thing,
There
i.e.,
you
helps us to move beyond our mind, helps us to come back and reconnect or connect for the first time, with ourselves, with our true nature. And my
Yeah.
feeling is that's really what we're all seeking. We're seeking something bigger than us. Um,
Yep.
and that's the journey that I've been on the last few years, particularly. We're seeking
Mm.
connection with something greater than us. And
Yeah.
we want to know what we really are and who we really are
Yeah.
because we
Yeah.
don't really know. And so breath work is
No.
a much more subtle and measured way, I feel,
Yeah.
of coming back into connection with that thing that is the real us. Um,
That
in a, s-
that
in
makes
a,
sense to
yeah,
me.
yeah,
Yeah, because what I'm getting from what you're saying, because and I guess the reason why psychedelics fascinates me is because I'm an addict. I want something outside of myself to change how I feel, and so that's why it fascinated me. And I also get the fact that we can be limited by our mind if we don't let go. And what you're saying is, and that's why it makes so much sense to me, that breathworks can do that in a very more subtle way, but obviously a safer way, because psychedelics can take me to a place that I'm not ready for because it's unnatural. Whereas if I can do breathwork, it's taken me within my limits that I have right now.
yeah.
Yeah. So that makes sense to me. And it's really bringing that breathworks into my life and being consistent with it, which I find difficult to be consistent with anything. I'm going to change that language. I used to find it difficult to be consistent. I'm moving forward in that now. I'm becoming more consistent because I know that's when I get results. And with breathworks, I haven't told you this. After that session, um, or the Soul Sanctuary, a couple of weeks ago, I went for a run
Yeah.
the next day, and I'm not running like I used to. And I'm struggling to get fitter. I beat my PB of these last few years after that session. So I'm wondering if, well, I don't have to wonder. It's a muscle, right? And I was using it the night before I went for a run, and I've stretched it out. And one of my things with running again, getting fitter again, was my breathing. I'd struggled with it, so it actually makes sense. So in terms of fitness as well, I'm guessing it helps you with the fitness for athletes. I wonder if athletes do it. I bet they do. Do they?
Yeah, much more and more and more these days. And
They're realizing,
my
yeah,
yeah, I mean, my focus with breathwork particularly is more around emotional healing, emotional regulation. But there is a whole
yeah,
bunch of breathwork that does focus on performance, sports performance, mindset, and some of that is a combination of the stuff that I kind of do,
mhm,
and then,
yeah,
specific protocols and practices to increase VO2, lots of different things. Using the diaphragm, which really is your primary breathing muscle, as you do
yeah,
when we do. a breathwork session, and getting it unstuck really will help you with your running, or just day
Yeah.
to day, because our breath and our emotions are related. And where we typically, as you were saying, like being an addict or being in recovery, typically we've sought to move away from the difficult feelings, right? And that
Yeah.
could be, and I speak for myself, my challenge now, having removed the majority of things from my life, I've never had a substance abuse issue as such in the traditional sense, but definitely food is something that I've, over the years, on and off, had a dysfunctional relationship with, right? So it could be booze and alcohol and what have you. It could be drugs. It could be shopping. It could be relationships and
Yeah.
codependency. It could be
Yeah.
pornography. It could be, so many.
Yeah.
It could just be zoning out, disassociating, avoiding our life, right?
Yes.
And that's also a big one. I'm just going to turn my screen up so I can see. There we go. Yeah, whatever it
Okay.
is, we're always trying to avoid the
Yeah.
uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah.
And as you were saying before, just to kind of touch on something like talk therapy, everything has its place, right? And that was
Yeah.
how I got into my healing journey. Was actually, I went to see a therapist and I was freaking terrified. And at the time I was in a relationship with somebody that was in recovery. He'd been in recovery for a couple of years, and he was also seeing a therapist. And I thought, well, maybe I'm going to see a therapist. And so through a recommendation, I ended up seeing somebody, and I was
Yeah.
crapping myself. And
Yeah.
so I did that on and off, though. It was great for about 2 years. I think a year for
Yeah.
about weekly for a year, and then bi-weekly for the second year. And it was
Mm.
it was really, really helpful to understand where I was at and what was going on, and what was going on in my head, and some of the patterns and things that were playing out. It wasn't really until I got into the breath work that I recognized that it's not just about the story. The story is driven
Yeah.
by my emotions that are
Yeah.
unresolved,
Yes.
and that's the power
I
of the
get
breath
that.
work. Is if I use my breath and my body to open up,
Yeah.
to clear out the feelings that are related to the situation, then actually the story is gonna lose its charge. It loses
Yeah.
its importance, and I can move on with my
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. Right. And that's why I changed what I was saying, right? Because I have a narrative. And if I say I'm not consistent with something, that's the narrative that I'm going with. And that's kind of how I'm going to present in my life, right? Because I'm saying that's what I am. So the narrative is so important. And like you're saying, if we kind of leave our cognitive mind and our thinking, and we go into our body, that narrative loses its power, right? Which is so important. And yeah, and kind of releasing that emotion, because we are limited. I think if we put our thinking on it, we don't know a lot of the time what's going on, because we've got these ways of hiding it and distracting from it and disassociating with it. So but if we go into our body, it kind of does its own thing. And I hadn't thought about it like that, Phil, so thank you for that. You've given me a kind of deeper thought on that. Now, because of what you shared and how important it is, I think, breathing, because I believe, and I don't know, you might tell me, you know my breathing better than me. I was a shallow breather. Does that go with kind of addiction and that kind of thing? Because, like you're saying, going deeper, I was afraid to go deeper. That's kind of how I was living, so I won't breathe deeper. Is there a link with that?
Yes,
Have I
typically
got that
there
right?
is. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So how do I? So me as well. Now I know, because I've had the privilege of you working on me, and I've kind of had some lovely sessions. And but I as well want to bring it back into my life, uh, in a daily practice. Right. I want to bring it back into my life so that I can start to engage more. I want to bring it in with my meditation, maybe. But what would you say if so, people that might be listening that want to start with breathworks, and they want to start simple, maybe they're a bit afraid of what they're doing, or want to understand it a bit more, but it feels too much to do too much too soon. What sort of advice would you give to somebody who's thinking about kind of using their breath in a different way?
Yeah, good call. So, firstly, I would have a look around at what's out there. You know, there are lots of different so many more teachers now than 10 years ago when I found this and everybody thought I was a crazy person for you're a breathing coach. Ha ha ha, you know, get used to get laughed at and all sorts. And now you've
Yeah,
got, you know, BBC making documentaries like about people like Wim Hof, I think it was BBC or whoever it
yeah,
was, you know, and we'll
yeah,
maybe talk about that in a bit. But now
yeah,
it's so much more popular and people are aware of it, which is great. So there are lots of people out there talking about it. Find something that is easy to begin with, small and easy, whether that's a guided meditation, whether that's a guided breath awareness thing, you know, something that you're actually enjoying and that you are going to make the time to do. Because
yeah,
there's great expectations and "Oh, I'm going to do this, that, and the other, and then we don't do any of it, is not worth anything. Versus if we do 1 or 2 minutes of just coming back to ourselves and being aware of what's going on, that can grow over time. So don't give yourself a unrealistic expectation and fall
no,
flat because, as we know, when we do that, we then start beating ourselves up and we go into a negative spiral. So start small, start with something that you enjoy. What I would say is that there are really, for me, one very, very important thing with the breath is that the breath is very, very powerful. And also our will is very, very powerful. A lot of the pain, sadness, depression, anxiety, whatever else that we're carrying in our life is is trapped inside of us. Okay. The breath is a really powerful tool that can help us get access to that if we want it and if we want to get it out. And if we don't, then our will is a very powerful tool to keep it
yeah,
there.
yeah,
As we know. And I don't mean our willpower, I mean what's already going on automatically at a soul level,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
For
yeah,
example, we say, "Oh, I really want to cry, but I can't cry." Well, no, actually, if you're saying you really want to cry, but you're not crying, there's
yeah,
something going on internally that is blocking you from
yeah,
crying. Your will
yeah,
is really your true will is in the opposite direction for whatever reason, fear,
yeah,
judgment, humiliation of the past, whatever it is. So the breath can be used as a really, really powerful tool for transformation and healing and growth if we want it. So, if you
yeah,
also want to use your breath to disassociate and get away from your feelings and away from
yeah,
your body, that also happens. That can happen too. And if you do that, you might space out for a bit, but it's not really going to give you the long term benefit of clearing the crap out. It's just going to stay the same.
yeah, yeah,
So that's the first thing I'd say about breathwork and our will. It's totally our choice how we want to go forward. If we're really worried that, oh my goodness, I've heard all these scary things about breathwork, right? Um,
What are
that's
them
not
scary things
necessary.
that people hear? What are the things that
What are the
the scary
scary
things that people
things?
say about breath?
Oh, I might have a meltdown, or I might cry, or I'll go crazy, or um, weird and wonderful sensations, or I might have some memories come back, or those
Yeah,
kinds of
okay,
things, right?
yeah,
And yes, they do happen. Yes, you might cry. Yes, you might equally laugh, right? Yes, you might have weird and wonderful sensations going on in your body.
yeah,
And that is part of leaning into the discomfort when we're going through any sort of healing journey. And sometimes it's incremental, right? We don't want to open the floodgates and we're never going to come back. That's really not the point. And that's why I
no,
say find something small and begin to test the water, because you will notice that
mm,
there will be resistance. Like when you say, oh, it's hard work, right?
yeah,
It can be hard work because we're so locked down,
yeah,
right, in our habitual patterns.
yeah, yeah,
The irony is we don't realize how locked down we are and exhausted by that.
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
Of not being ourselves,
I
or
can relate.
not following our dream, or whatever it is, or
Yeah,
not being nice to everybody, or making sure that everybody likes us, people pleasing,
yeah,
perfectionism,
yeah,
whatever. Yeah. So that is the
yeah.
exhausting thing, really. But we've been doing it for such a long time, we don't even realize the energy caught up in it. So then when we're looking at doing some breath work and breathing deeper and changing our habitual breathing patterns,
Mm,
it can feel like hard work, because we're
yeah.
undoing all of that muscular tension that has been in place for such a long time. And we're like, oh God, this
Yeah,
is hard.
it is, and that's how I feel, because I think you're right. It's that restriction I've had. I recognise when we say shallow breathing, that's what I do. And when I come to your sessions, I'm breathing from my belly and from my chest, and it feels like expanding. That feels exhausting because I breathe so shallow, and so
Yeah.
I've really got to. And I think my emotional kind of baggage follows that. It's so tight, so I need to release it. And so I can relate to that. And when you're talking about find something simple, what do you mean? Give us a practical example. Do you mean, like, for me, I have Insight Timer on my phone, which has got meditations, it's got breathing, it's got all the options, like a million and one options that I can have, live or not so live. It's a brilliant app. Yes, it costs money, but it's valuable to me, right? Do you mean that, like finding a certain meditation that's got breathing in it, or something from a book, or is that what you mean?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so find
Right.
something either free, on YouTube,
Yeah.
or one of your
Yeah.
meditation apps. You can
Yeah.
find little breathing or breath awareness exercises everywhere. I I am in the process of recording a few also on my podcast, so perhaps you can link that
I
as
will put the
well,
link
so that
in.
people can,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So some
Yeah.
simple breathing exercises. I'll give you an exercise at the end of this. I'll guide everybody through
Perfect.
a little a
Wow.
little breath awareness exercise, which can be really, really simple. It's just to get into that practice of coming
Yeah.
back to yourself. So it could
Yeah.
be an extension to
Yeah.
your meditation practice. It could be you wake up in the morning, you lay there for 2 minutes and just put your hand on your abdomen and
Yeah.
breathe in. And when you breathe in, your abdomen lifts up under your hands. Right? Could be really, really simple. Just taking a few
Yeah.
moments to come back, because so often we are disassociated, disconnected from our body, and our body has so much gold and wisdom to share with us about where we're blocked and about how we can get more freedom
Yeah.
if we listen. But we're so busy in our head and out there in the world that we're not listening.
Yeah. And that's so true. And that's what I've learned in I continue to learn, because I'm so it's my default to shut down and just not listen to my body, listen to myself. I'm so good at I used to be, I'm changing that narrative. I used to be so good at shutting all that stuff out, right? Because that's how I cope, that's how I survived. So I'm not knocking it, it's how I got through. However,
Yeah.
that's changing now. And I love that you're gonna give us a small guided kind of breath work, and I will put the link in. And that's what I wanted, what you said about just sometimes in the morning, just for 2 minutes, to put your hand on the abdomen and breathe consciously. So you feel it expand and feel it kind of lower. What benefits, before we do go into the guided and before I nip off to the loo, because that's what I do. I live my life on the toilet now. It's my age. Um, when you tell the benefits, listing them, so those that are listening to think, well, okay, I could do that for 2 minutes in the morning, and that. But what other benefits apart from having that stillness, and we know what we can get from that? What other benefits, practical benefits, will people get from implementing breathworks into their life?
Good question. Yeah, because why? Why bother, right? Why bother?
Yeah,
What's it gonna give you?
yeah, what?
So
Yeah, okay.
so generally, it's gonna make you feel better physically, because
Yeah,
we are moving our lungs. We are moving our organs in our abdomen as well, to a greater degree than we might otherwise do, okay? A lot of breathwork teachers will say we bring in more oxygen, and yes, we may bring in more oxygen. It depends on the type of breathwork you're doing. And generally, we're going to get a more of a flow of air into our body, oxygen into our body, and also waste products out of our body, because our diaphragm, which is the muscle that we should be using, massages our organs when it goes down into our abdomen. And it also forms part of the lymphatic system. So it actually helps, in addition to our muscles pumping our lymph, which is our kind of waste materials out of our body, the diaphragm has the similar action as well. So we bring in more good stuff, prana, air, life force, energy, and we're actually helping our body release the waste products and toxins as well. It can help us sleep better. It can help us release things like pain, energize us up, depending on what we want to do as well. Breathwork is quite a diverse tool that we can have certain breathing exercises that's like a shot of caffeine, right? Or we can have a breathwork
Thanks.
exercise
Yeah,
that
I have
brings
some of
us
that.
into a state of relaxation. Yeah,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it's so diverse, but ultimately you're going to feel better. You're going to have more capacity for your emotions as well, generally.
Yeah,
And clarity of thinking. Often we get so much brain
yeah,
fog where we're not connected to
yeah,
ourselves as well. We don't really
yeah.
know what we want, or we
No,
can't really get access to ideas when we're not really here.
yeah. I think you've just hit the nail on the head about kind of all those benefits. It depends on what we're looking for. We can get different kind of benefits from that. It can be like a shot of caffeine, loving that, but also the relaxation. And I need to sleep better. I know that's for sure. And I need to implement it in my life. But also the kind of coming out of my head, right? The brain fog. So I'm in there too much, or also, kind of on my devices too much. So I'm so in my head of so much information going on around the overwhelm, and then that can lead to the depression or the anxiety or whatever. And I think breath works, whenever I've been worked, when you've worked with me before and I come away from that session, I'm just like, I feel like a different person. But then my problem was I didn't implement it, and I know if I'd have continued, wow, because of fitness, because of being more connected with myself, um, calming my mind down, because my mind would be racing, but always racing. And then I'd come and
Yeah,
have a session with you and I'd walk out and I'd be like, wow. And that's what happened that Friday night after Soul Sanctuary. It's just like, wow, just this sense of
yeah,
peace. And that sense of peace gives me the quietness of mind that I can be with me. And that just, we all know, kind of being with yourself, you understand your emotions, you're able to deal with your emotions, you can start to kind of live authentically almost.
yeah,
And so I'm going to do that. What you said is 2 minutes every morning. I'm going to commit to that. Just from before we do, sorry, and before we do a guided now, when I breathe from my belly, because that's where I don't usually breathe from, and then I bring it into my chest, and so we kind of inhale in our belly and in our chest. That I found that quite difficult. Is that because when you combine them two, or is it meant to be combined? Am I meant to be breathing into my belly and into my chest at the same time?
yes. So
Right.
you can imagine that you're like a cylinder, okay, and we expand in all dimensions, right?
Yeah.
When our ribs expand, our side ribs at the side actually kind of come up and out. And
Right.
when we
Yeah.
when we breathe in our abdomen, our diaphragm descends into the abdomen and the abdomen moves out slightly. Depending
Right.
on what type of breath work we're doing, which you're
Okay.
referencing the one that we've done in the session, is
Yeah.
that we predominantly focus on breathing into our abdomen, and that
Yes.
activates our diaphragm. So that might look like our abdomen expands and contracts, not just in the belly, though, out the front, but to the sides and into the back. So we can begin, that focus of breathing in, imagining maybe we've got a balloon in our abdomen and we're inflating that. Ideally, in an ideal world, our diaphragm and our chest all naturally move as one. They naturally
Yeah.
expand as one. But often, where we've created or where we've obtained dysfunctional breathing patterns in our body, that doesn't always happen to be connected. And it can feel
Yes.
like more forced. So our
Yes.
heart and our chest area is often the place that we are nursing our grief.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we
Right.
close our
That makes
heart
sense.
and we close our chest. So we kind of shrink, our shoulders come in. And so opening that area up as well, oh, that feels quite vulnerable. So again,
Yeah.
that might be some of the resistance in our chest when we bring that. So the breath from the abdomen, we're breathing into the abdomen first, then we're in kind of through the midsection, and then into the chest, kind of up to the collarbone area. We're opening almost and exposing our heart again,
Yeah.
which can feel
Right.
really vulnerable. Would that make sense?
My God, that makes it. First of all, the disconnect. 'Cause I've been doing it in my belly, and then you'd say about the chest. We'd move into the chest area, and it felt like right up in my belly, and then I've got to breathe in my chest. So that says to me, I felt the disconnect, and then it felt forced to try and inflate my chest. Well, that makes sense. I'm, shutting down my heart, heartbreak, trauma, grief, loss, that kind of thing. Um, that makes perfect sense.
I think one thing I want to say as well is that we're meant to be human and we're meant to have emotions. And it's how we
Yeah,
deal with that that becomes the difficulty, because I think there's a particular judgment in our culture and society, particularly in British culture, but I think this is a worldwide thing anyway,
yeah,
that there's a problem if you're emotional and if you're sensitive and if you feel things, and that's where we've gone wrong. If you look at the number of people in difficulty, whether that's in some sort of addiction or depression or anxiety or, mental health crisis of some description, right? I'm going to call it that. When you look at addiction, I think it's the Gabor Mate quote, is like, you don't look at what's wrong with the addiction, you look at what's right with the addiction.
yeah,
It's giving you something. What is it giving you,
yes, yes,
right?
yeah,
And overthinking, I mentioned this to you the other week, overthinking is underfeeling.
yes,
We're using different methods, whether physical or intellectual, to avoid being human, to avoid our feelings, to avoid the
yeah,
vulnerability, shame, that whatever other emotion, fear and grief are usually hugely mixed in there. That is already inside of us. That has been put there at
yeah,
some point and that needs to come out. And so I wanted to say that because for me, breathwork is really about freedom. It's about emotional freedom. It's about being free to be who you are and having a place and having a toolkit that you can actually use to resolve some of those things internally. And it's great to have the support and have the courses and have the therapist or the meetings and what have you.
mm,
And it comes back to self and personal responsibility, right? For
yeah,
taking the stuff. I'm going to say we're often carrying around a backpack of junk, particularly from our childhood. Yeah.
yeah,
And it doesn't really now matter how it got there, because we can't change that. But what
no,
matters is that we're the person responsible for emptying that bag out.
yeah,
And only we can do that, because as you said, you've come and done some breath work with me. Whatever has shifted in that time is what you were ready to shift and what you were open to shift. You can
yes,
continue that process. And to
yeah,
say that I don't really in my work believe that I do healing or I do the thing. I facilitate a process. If somebody comes in to see me and they're crying before we do any breath work, my work is done because that is the emotion that they need to get into and release. Right? Brilliant. I can go out the room, I can go out for half an hour as they're bawling their eyes out. Great, because that needs to come out. That's already stuck in there.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I just wanted to add that because breathwork is really about, it's a self-healing tool. It's something that you can do with nobody interfering. Yes, you
yes,
can go and see a facilitator, and that's great if you want the extra support.
yeah,
But it's a tool that you can use
mm,
in the privacy of and comfort of your own home. It's literally right under your nose. You don't need any
yeah,
special equipment, and you
yes,
can do it whenever.
yeah. I can I add to that because I think that's really important. That's the important part. What I want to kind of to share that breathing, we all breathe. You know, if it comes to a point in life where sometimes we don't want to think about something that's gone, that we can't deal with it, and we know we've got to process it, we can just start with breath work. We haven't got to think about it. We can start with breath work to release it. And I know many people that are afraid to talk about things or to even think about things. Well, that's okay, because we can start with breathworks, and maybe that will release enough for you to later on talk about it when you're ready. Like you say, the willpower is so powerful. It's like it will happen when we're ready for it. And breathworks can be a start, and you don't need any money, you don't need any equipment or anything. We can do it in privacy of our own home, and it will help so many other things. Like generally, it's good for our body, massaging our organs, all the stuff that you shared, which is amazing. And that's important for me, that I can just kind of breathe through it. You know, they don't just say
Yeah.
it's breathe through it. Sometimes it's all I'm capable of doing is breathe through it. And so I want to bring that practice in.
And just
Go
to
on.
say, I was going to, and I'll go into practice in a second, but just to say that is the uncomfortable, the
Yeah,
unknown, but it takes practice, and it takes us building our faith and building that window of tolerance. And hence why I said, start small. If
yeah,
you're interested in it, breathwork can absolutely change your life, and it can give you the
yeah,
thing that is internally sourced, right? That you're looking for.
yeah. And so accessible because we can do it ourselves. And I think, like you just said, it's sometimes just acknowledging rather than ignoring, acknowledging. So I'm sitting with it, breathing and acknowledging how we feel. That can be as simple. That's the starting point. We can just do that.
That's it.
Sit, take some deep breaths and acknowledge whatever. It might not be physical pain, it might be emotional pain. Acknowledge it for a bit. If we can only acknowledge it for a little bit, fine, and then we can get on with the day. But you know, they say a problem shared is a problem halved. Is kind of also sharing it with yourself, you know, like not ignoring it. Let me sit with it.
Right.
There's some pain there. Let me sit with it. And then that can be a starting point and allow us to then to sort of process it later on when we're ready, bit by bit, I guess. Yeah, it
Yeah,
makes sense to
totally.
me.
Totally.
Thank you, my lovely.
Welcome. Okay, so let's do a little practice, shall we?
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. So, if you want to join us, you're very welcome. I'm going to invite you just to find a nice, comfortable position, either seated or lying down, whatever feels good for you, and wherever you're at. And if you can, place your feet on the ground, or be sat on the ground, maybe, or sat on something nice and comfy. And I'm just going to invite you to gently close your eyes when you're ready. Gently closing your eyes, softening your eyes and softening your face. And just begin to bring your awareness to the inside of your body. Just noticing that you have this beautiful gift of a body. And I'm going to invite you just to take a couple of deep breaths, just in through your nose. And let go. And don't worry too much about where the breath is going for now. Just breathing in through the nose. And let go. And in a moment, when we take our next inhale, we're going to inhale through the nose and we're going to exhale through the mouth. And as we breathe in through the nose, we're going to raise our shoulders up towards our ears. And as we exhale, maybe with a sigh out of the mouth, we're going to drop our shoulders back down. So we inhale through our nose and bring our shoulders up to the ears. As we exhale, we bring our shoulders down and exhale through the mouth. So breathing in, shoulders up. Exhale, shoulders down through the mouth. Inhale through the nose, shoulders up. Exhale through the mouth, shoulders down. One more time. Inhale through the nose, shoulders up. Exhale through the mouth, shoulders down. And we're just going to breathe gently in and out through the nose now, if that's available to you. And just notice how you're feeling on the inside. Notice if anything maybe has changed or you're aware of any feeling or sensation. And we're going to bring our awareness down to our feet on the ground. And if we're sitting or lying, our hips on our chair. And if we're lying down, our back. All of the areas that are touching the ground. So this interface between your body and the earth. Gently breathing out in and out through the nose at the moment, but becoming aware of the ground beneath you. And noticing that the earth is holding you in this perfect, precise position. And the ground is always here, no matter what is going on in your life or in the world, that we can always come back to this place. And just notice how your body feels. You might feel heavy or light. You might feel tingly in places. Or a bit numb in places. Just notice. And I'm going to invite you just to place a hand or two on your abdomen below your navel. And breathing in and out of our nose still. I'm going to invite the breath a little bit deeper and imagining that we have a golden balloon in our abdomen. And as you breathe in, your balloon inflates in your abdomen in all directions. And you can feel it underneath your hand. As you breathe in, your abdomen expands. As you exhale, your abdomen softens. Nice and gently, breathing in, expanding. As you exhale, softening. And just notice how it feels, if it feels easy or it feels challenging. Expanding your abdomen and then softening. And then on your next exhale, letting go of needing to control the breath, just allowing the breath to soften and your body to do its thing naturally. And just noticing how you feel. And when you're ready, you can begin to bring your awareness back into the room, feeling your body pressing down on the chair. Wriggling your fingers and toes. And gently beginning to open your eyes. And have a little look around, noticing where you are. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for that, Phil.
You're so welcome.
Oh, I
think it shows us,
Go
I
on.
think, also how much hypervigilance we have about persona intact, that we're always trying to control things and monitor things in our environment.
No judgment part of it. Like, I'm not judging that. I'm witnessing what I'm like. I know I need to breathe more consciously. I mean, to it's almost stretch my body out to release it, like you said, the freedom, to get the freedom there. I feel locked down. And even though I'm in a good space at the moment, a very good space, breathwork would just enhance that. I know where it takes me and I know what I want. And so one of the things that the YouTube channel gives me is that I commit to myself. It reminds me of stuff, like I find in recovery that I'll learn this little gem or something, and like today with you, it kind of reminds me of things. I go, oh wow, yeah, I'd kind of forgotten that. And so I'm able to bring it back into my life. And if I have to keep my practice up, my YouTube is kind of forcing me to look at them places and go, yeah, I'm going to bring that consistency back in, commit to myself again. It kind of reminds me of all that stuff. So thank you for being my first guest on my YouTube channel.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
It's been a long time coming. I'll put all the links down, Phil. I'll put down the Soul Sanctuary link as well that's on Eventbrite. I'll put down, give me all the info and I'll add it so we can put it in the link. So if anyone's interested in connecting with you, maybe if they want to ask you some questions or something, or
sure.
and you've got some do you do podcast, don't you? You've got maybe links to your podcast.
Yep.
Whatever, we'll put the links in. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, as I always do. Love you forever. And I'll be seeing you again soon anyway. I have to come to I can't wait to get to one of these sessions again. See if I get any feelings on my we will see. I love you very much, Phil. Thank
you. Love you too, mate. All right, take care.
All right, darling. Right, thanks, darling. Love you very much. Always have a wonderful Monday.